Okay, it's 2 o'clock. I think we'll get started. Welcome, everyone. We're glad that you're here today. Looks like 160 have signed on so far. I'm going to leave the window open for another 10 minutes or so for people to join. Be sure that your mic is on mute over there. I think if you hover towards the bottom of your screen, you should be able to see a chat feature there where people can send messages and discussion. We're encouraging you to see that for everybody. I think I don't see a question there about muting. I don't think you have to worry about that. It looks like everyone's muted right now except for the panelist. And so don't worry about that. And but do look for that chat feature so you can see or add comments in there. I'm pretty sure that that's available for everyone. If not, we'll figure out something here with email. So we'll send an evaluation at the end of this presentation. And if you have any questions, you can contact me at jeffbaker@appic.org. And we're going to issue a certificate for CE for 2 hours for participating in this program. And wanted to thank everyone for taking time out of their day to do this with us and to hear what we have to say. This was, of course, originally planned to be presented at the 2020 membership conference in San Diego, which is now come and gone, sadly to say. But there are plans to look at possible future dates for that and even additional Zoom seminars or webinars for popular topics. But we'll get started here. My name is Jeff Baker. I serve as Executive Director for APPIC. I was an internship training director for 20 plus years and a postdoc in clinical health psychology training director for a number of years. And wanted to welcome my co-presenters here, both APPIC board members. And so we'll take a second to have them introduce themselves. Dr. Aosved.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Allison Aosved. I'm a current member of the APPIC board, and I'm excited to be with you all today virtually, even if it's not at the membership conference. In terms of training director experience, I've been a VA training director at 2 different VA institutions, both for the internship and postdoctoral level of training, and more recently was successful in moving an unaccredited postdoctoral program to accreditation using the multiple practice mechanism, so in multiple specialty areas. I'm so familiar with APA standards of accreditation and how that applies to training at the internship and the postdoctoral level. And again, I'm just so excited to be with you all today. So thanks. And I should turn it over to my colleague on the board, Dr. Matt Zimmermann.
I was waiting for the introduction. Hi, everyone. I'm Matt Zimmermann. I am the training director at the University of Virginia's Counseling Center, and I've been there for 15 years. I came into a relatively mature program there, which I was very thankful about, and certainly have made lots of changes, including the standards of accreditation. I'm also on the APPIC Board of Directors, and I'm looking forward to spending the time with you.
Great. Thanks to both of you for joining us today, taking time out of your busy schedule. Matthew's at the University of Virginia, and Allison's on the Pacific Islands over there in Hawaii. And I'm here in Houston, Texas, so you're getting someone from almost every time zone, not quite all, but many of them. So thank you all for joining us. We want to talk about a little bit overview, and we can't get into the detail. We'd love to get into detail, but we probably won't be getting into lots of details, but certainly try to respond to some of the issues and prioritizing what goals you might have for your program. But for today, we're hopefully going to cover a number of different things, including roles, the importance of accreditation, talking about internship and training director development, organizing your training year, recruitment selection of interns, as well as using the APPIC online and the APPICast, the postdoc program there. Of course, match for phase 1, phase 2, and post-match vacancy service, as well as trying to talk a little bit about cultural individual differences and diversity and how that is infused throughout the curriculums, issues with supervision of supervisors and evaluation of your programs, your supervisors, as well as all the curriculum, due process, etc. So obviously that is a huge amount of material to cover in a short period of time. So we're not going to get into the depths of it, but hopefully able to identify some tips of the trade, so to speak. And I know we have a wide variety of folks out there from 1 to 4 years, and I think there are a few others with more than 4 years that snuck in on this presentation, but that's okay. We can all learn something, and hopefully you'll use the chat to share information. If we ask a question or whatever, you may not be able to verbally answer it, but you should be able to post your responses on chat, as well as the evaluation at the end of the program there. So let's see if I can figure out how to move these slides again. There they go. So there are lots of roles for as a training director. The newest one is there listed there. None of you thought you'd be a manager for COVID-19, but it certainly is something that everyone is learning new skills with and becoming creative and innovative and doing things that you never ever thought you would be able to do or want to do in managing this issue here. And training directors taking heat from doctoral clinical directors and from the interns and from their administrators. So it's been a very interesting last few months. I don't think we're at the end of that. I think that they are going to continue to surface, and APPIC wants to continue to be a resource and try to help provide some support for you, support for trainees, support for the doc programs as well. This is an issue that we're all in this together, and we're going to try to figure out how to manage this. I think the world has changed, and so has training. So we will continue to move forward. So many of you have to serve as an administrator, do all kinds of paperwork. You have to recruit, you have to hire folks. You have to advocate for the program, and there are a number of programs right now that are going through some serious financial reviews from universities and institutions. So we understand that. So if you're having any difficulties with that, please be sure to contact APPIC. Some of you are serving in parental roles, both for your own children as well as the children in the internship program there and the postdoc program. You're definitely a buffer between supervisors and supervisees, as well as clinical supervisors. And your interns look to you certainly as a role model and a mentor. And you got to launch these folks off into their new career here, or their emerging professional career. Though you also have to serve as an evaluator, and many of you supervise and manage supervision. You teach lectures, you do seminars, you're learning. All of us learn stuff every day from our supervisees and our trainees and our patients. We all know that. And then APA requires you to be a program evaluator and to be a self-study writer, which many of us didn't sign up for, and we have learned a lot as we do that, and you will learn a lot as you do that as well. I think I've written at least 5 or 6, maybe 10 self-studies kinds of things. So there are lots of tasks that a training director has there. We mentioned a lot of that kind of stuff there, keeping up with fees and thousands of emails that come from APPIC, et cetera. So we're so sorry about all those emails, and it's just one of those things. And please don't put us in your spam folder, but every once in a while you may want to check your spam folder because we seem to end up there. Lots of issues that you have to manage your staff, and as we mentioned in that first slide there, dealing with evaluations, structuring and improving your didactic schedule. And I'll just say another point about that. The whole thing here is about quality improvement. Training is fun, it's energizing, but you are constantly looking and receiving input about improving your program. And that comes from external, from standards of accreditation or APPIC membership criteria, to institutional requirements that you might have to meet, as well as your own goals and objectives that you set for the training of your interns and those profession-wide competencies that are expected of all of your graduates. And then you have to document all of this information. Interns begin seeking postdocs around the second month of the internship, and you're already having to write letters of recommendation. One thing that a lot of folks forget about is you're really supposed to communicate with the DCT, the Director of Clinical Training, and you definitely need to keep in touch with them at least through a mid-year evaluation and end-of-year evaluation. That's the minimum amount of communication. This year has been very interesting because there's been so much communication between DCTs and training directors, and it's kind of been healthy to see that. So people are starting to understand or trying to understand each other's roles a little bit better. And of course, from now to the end of your lifetime, you will be filling out licensing forms and verification of employment for all of your current and former trainees. And of course, as I've mentioned, quality improvement in the training program. So just a little bit about our central office here. That's where I'm located at in Houston, Texas. We used to be in DC up until 2011. We moved here because the rent's a lot cheaper and it's closer to my home. So it worked out for me and worked out for APPIC to some degree. We're still on a trial basis probably, but I'm hanging in there. We do have a member services coordinator here, Jessica Shapley, who is very helpful and supportive, and Tiana Kasi runs our IT and database information, and then Jesse helps out with the newsletters and dues and financial issues, etc. Just wanted to give you a little bit brief information there, and these are the activities that we do for our central office there. People want to know what the heck we're doing there, but phone, email takes up a lot of that time. Doing our taxes and our books and submitting invoices, those kinds of things, involved with internship renewals, working with the website, working on our directory online, and working with the IPCs. And we'll talk more about IPCs, the informal problem consultation, as we go through these slides. So currently APPIC is made up of more than 750 internship programs. 640 of those are currently APA accredited and 34 of those are CPA accredited. There's 107 not accredited programs. And as a matter of fact, we just sent out a survey to the non-accredited folks there because APPIC is continuing to consider moving towards requiring accreditation and wanted to see what kind of resources would be needed to help out those that are currently not accredited. APPIC added a second P back in 1989, 1990 or so to add postdoc programs to APPIC. And central office here gets involved with internship application. For this year, we had 16 new applications so far for internship programs, and we added a new category this year called provisional membership. Some of you may be familiar with that, you may not. It allows programs a window to use APPIC to seek and recruit trainees for their established training program, meaning that everything has to be in place except for the 2 interns on site. So we have that new opportunity for developing programs, because if we didn't have that, and if we move to accredited only, there's no window there. So provisional membership gives folks an opportunity to become full members of APPIC and become accredited at some point. We do lose a number of programs. We're losing them this year. Several have had to drop out for financial reasons. Some of that's because their programs, the intern supply demand has changed a little bit. It has shifted more towards the supply area there, and so interns are finding it a little less difficult to get a good match, a perfect match, and programs are finding it a little bit more difficult that they're having to recruit and to be fairly transparent and helpful for interns finding a good fit for them. So that's a new phenomena there that training directors are managing and having to deal with. This is the directory online where you can search the program types, you can search the department, the training director, etc. Students use this for applying. So the biggest issue we have is people don't keep that directory up to date. I'm not sure why. Probably because you only do it once a year and it's kind of quirky. So I understand that. So a central office will help you do that. And Mary Mendoza Newman sends out the announcement, and she should be sending that out in a couple weeks about what new changes are expected in the new directory. Wanted to talk just a little bit about passages. This is a very old title that was written in 1982 by 3 interns and a training director called Passages of an Internship in Professional Psychology, and many of those passages still fit. So, of course, I have to cite that because it was important to me to go through those passages in understanding my ideas of professional development and what stages that we went through as trainees in relationship to the training agency. So, of course, that pre-entry there, everyone is putting together their applications, their pre-arrival kinds of stuff before they get there. We are looking at strongly encouraging programs to consider virtual interviews for the 2021 upcoming year. Zoom seems to work pretty well compared to 5 years ago. It was pretty quirky and difficult, and as a matter of fact, the students were the ones that were actually demanding to have on-site interviews because they wanted to see where they were going to be at, get a good feel for that. So we're not at the point of eliminating that, but I think that the board will be coming out with a statement about strongly encouraging virtual interviews. That second stage that we had identified, there had a little bit of a syndrome there in terms of how you find your place in the agency. COVID-19 is certainly going to add some challenges to this stage because interns got together. They would spend 5 intensive days in orientation and start to socialize and go out to lunch and to learn a little bit more about each other. And you had a bit of a cohesiveness naturally forming. So you're going to have to want to think about this, how this is going to form, especially if you do a remote orientation and this continues for a month or two where you're trying to get up and running using a virtual telehealth system. And of course, your identity, there's a significant stage there, at least for most people. They're going through their internship and they become focusing on, oh, I am going to be a psychologist after all. It's not a issue that I can turn back now because I'm committed to this, and getting into the role of being a psychology intern gives you a pretty good formation of that identity as a psychologist. Certainly patients and clients start to respond to you as a professional, your colleagues respond to you as a professional, and you find out that you really know more than you thought you did. So it's a great time there for you as you begin moving towards this emerging professional where you get this increased sense of competency, positive feedback from those evaluations that are held, and you're moving towards that role as a psychologist. And then, of course, that in there, we use the resolution as that last stage there, that you're really beginning to figure out how you're moving on into your postdoc or into your first year as a faculty member or employment, as you're separating from the agency and these newfound colleagues here that became very important to you during that 12 months. So a lot of people continue their communications. I have kept up with my former interns from many, many decades ago now, and we still have a very positive relationship. So there's also training director issues there in terms of training director development there. Lots of stages there in terms of your developing your energy and your patience to deal with bureaucracy and different aspects of different generations. Some people get concerned about entitlement issues, and most professional psychologists don't come from that direction, and it's a little bit different integration of managing that, but it is managed. Matter of fact, one of the themes at our conference was going to be focused on the millennials and how some of those connections and changes have been going on over the last few years. Another pitfall, or one of the pitfalls, is triangulation, interns using others against each other, and it gets a little difficult. So transparency, open communication, those professional practice seminars, times together are very important to limit that kind of triangulation issues that go on there. Lots of wonderful rewards, staying in touch with your trainees, and satisfaction from doing or having a nice training program that people value. There's lots of resources that APPIC has. We have a mentorship program for sure. That is, in your new stages here, you can certainly hook up with a mentorship program. It's a little overwhelmed right now, but it's still available. So it does take time. If you decide to sign up for that, you can go to appic.org and find the mentorship program there under membership. But a lot of people aren't aware of that the Commission on Accreditation also is really part of the Office of Program Consultation and Accreditation. So they are very open to consultation. So don't hesitate on talking with them. They don't take notes on your conversations and put them in your file or anything. Well, usually not. And we also have lots of training resources at appic.org under there. Some of those are dated, but some of them are still fairly valuable. One of the most valuable things that I've seen over the last year is the member listserv. So more and more people are using that as a resource. That's the way it was designed. It really didn't get much use prior to this last year or two. So that's great to see that. Moving on to figuring out organizing your training year. Most of you probably already figured out how you want to organize it, but you just know that there are certain recurring tasks that it would be helpful to put these on your calendar and to alert you this is going to happen, because they do sneak up on you and you don't want to be caught short on any of these, especially accreditation outcome data. You do want to continue to gather that information through the evaluations by your trainees of the program and your supervisors of the trainees and your trainees of the supervisors. That information is all typically used. It tends to, you want to aggregate it so that COA has a good picture of how your program is maintaining their quality and how they continue to improve their quality. I'm not going to go through all these, but many of you are familiar with the accreditation annual report. I think it still opens on May 1st and is due around September 15th. It's pretty accessible now, much easier to complete. And then APPIC also has the directory where all students, pretty much 99% of the students, go to the APPIC directory to look at your programs. And if you say that your start date is 2016, they're a little worried about you and how you're keeping up with information, but you don't look at that stuff. You haven't paid attention to it in over a year, obviously. But just remember that students and applicants are looking at that information. It's time to become more competitive and keep up with that information. I'm sure nobody on this call is reluctant to do that. I'm sure you can figure that out. All the match registration information, the hundreds and thousands of pages that come to you to read and sign, go out usually in August or September. This is just an overview of that. I laid out a different way here for both internship, postdoc, and what happens during the selection. So if you have, many of you have both internship and postdoc programs, so it's nice to have these laid out a little bit. And these slides I emailed to all of you, so you should have them, but if something happened and your firewall at your university or VA or hospital stopped it, let me know, and usually they'll go out. I can send them out individually. They may not go out as a group. And just more in terms of the dates that we're looking at here, I'm not going to go into those details. Those are available to you on those slides here, but it's organized by typical requirements during the year of what needs to be done. And you can certainly modify that and update that and make it as detailed as you want. I think most of you are familiar with the APPIC. I'm sorry, it's a new rollout in July, so it's a new APPIC. It's going to be a new APPIC. So Matt's going to have to develop a new song for the new APPIC, I guess. And people are familiar with the APPIC and what it does. And some of you use it to alphabetize your applicants. And some of you get into multiple regression equations about how you can predict the next class. And so you can get as into the weeds as you want, or you can use it as minimal as you want. But we believe, and we were going to demonstrate this for you at the last at the conference, and we have some screenshots not quite ready to roll out. We would have had them, but we put that off for now. But this is going to be exciting. If you've done the APPA, that's the postdoc, folks. It's very similar to the APPA. It has a few more whistles and stuff like that with it, and much easier to use. We've tested it out with applicants or new students. They have zero problems with this. It's so user-friendly for students who are native to this kind of stuff. But for those like me, it takes a few times to go through it and realize, oh, I can do this with that, I can do this. And we will have some workshops and some videos for everyone to see those as well. So there's some great enhancements coming that we think that people will like, both students and the training directors. We still require supplemental materials be limited to only one treatment summary and one assessment report, or you can do 2 of either one of those. That's still going to be in place there. No supplemental materials is part of that. The portal closes every year. You need to make sure you do not close your portal until after the published deadline. I believe this new APPIC that's rolling out will have it automated so that you can set it to close at a certain time, so you don't have to get up at midnight and close the thing, which a lot of people are doing. Some of you get a little confused between submitted and completed. So a submitted application usually is everything is done except for those transcripts. They just haven't been processed yet, or the university hasn't sent them out yet, and they haven't been logged in. So usually a submitted application is pretty much everything is done except for the transcripts and possibly the letters of recommendation. Sometimes those get delayed as well. The new features on this new APPIC is going to be great for the students because it'll be able for them to send a reminder to their letter writers. So I'll move on here. So I can't go on without mentioning the match. We've said a couple things about that, but the match became a computerized match around 1995 or so, I believe it was, under the protest of many people. But it really solved a lot of problems. The good old boys system was kind of put on the back burner there because there was no trading information. It took a while for us to convince applicants and training directors to rank order your best applicants and not worry about, oh, they'll never come here or I'll never get accepted there. It doesn't matter. That rank order system will push you up as soon as someone drops out of that other slot there. So there's no advantage to manipulating that. There is just zero advantage to doing that. I've mentioned the shift in the imbalance, so that's important to keep in mind, and as well as there are some issues with competitiveness where stipends are being increased, which is kind of a good thing. Get them up to minimum wage, that'd be really cool. And some programs are developing fancier brochures, better websites, more user-friendly, so that's great. And I already mentioned the directory. Usually it's June or July when that's going to be updated. That's critical information. The biggest complaint we have from applicants is they did not update their information. So we encourage them to contact you to see if there's been a change in those dates or if there's something missing. And again, you only do it once a year, so please feel free to contact central office to get your login or any of that kind of information. I'm going to mention accreditation here. It's moved to quality standards, which is great for the profession. It provides additional credibility. Lots of programs that move from non-accredited to accredited, their applications increased tenfold usually. It increases your likelihood of filling positions. The data is very strong there that unaccredited programs have a very difficult time filling their positions. Accredited is not as easy as it used to be, but there's a huge difference between non-accredited and accredited. Certainly takes a lot of time, of your time. It's expensive. There are some resources available, and APPIC has a accreditation readiness project that you should be aware of that's free and helps programs move forward. So again, I mentioned that program consultation. They do a lot of consulting. You need to be familiar with what's called accreditation operating procedures. Most people don't know those exist, as well as the implementing regulations. Most people don't know implementing regulations exist. those are important little helpful hints there about especially when you're writing a self-study. I think I'm going to turn it over to Allison right after this, mentioning the 5 profession-wide competency, or the 5 areas of standards that you are responsible for. They used to have a specific standard for cultural and individual differences, but they, with input from the training community, decided to infuse all of that into each one of these standards here, which is a good thing because it should be there. So turning it over to Allison there.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. Let's see some chat activity. Can folks hear me? Yes or no in the chat?
Yes.
I can see your responses. Awesome. Great, 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 great. Okay, great. Just wanted to make sure before I launch into things. So thanks, Jeff. Again, I just want to underscore that we are covering, I told Jeff and Matt when we were prepping this, I feel like we have a week's worth of material and we're going to cover it in 2 hours. So this really is broad strokes and pointing you in the direction of resources that might be helpful to get further into the weeds with things. And just for a little, I think, recap or pop quiz in the chat, when you all think about what you just heard about those 5 standards of accreditation, is diversity infused into all 5 standards, yes or no? Pop quiz. Yes, yes. So we're seeing a lot of yeses in the chat. That's great. So yes, diversity is infused into all 5 standards, which is why there's not a separate standalone standard or a more siloed approach to diversity, which, as Jeff said, is a good thing. So then, Jeff, moving on to APPIC membership criteria. So Jeff covered a bit about accreditation standards and how that impacts. And by the way, I want to point out that there is another accrediting body, the Canadian Psychological Association. So we talk a lot about APA, but we recognize that CPA also accredits, and that's important too. And they likewise have standards which address many things, including diversity. So I just want to give that shout out to the Canadians before moving on to APPIC membership criteria, which are similar but different than standards of accreditation. So when we're thinking about our APPIC membership criteria, we have 16 membership criteria, and they are available on our website. So that is an important resource in terms of visiting the website to find the details of what are each of those membership criteria, and also what kind of clarification is available for criteria that need clarification. So again, hit me in the chat, folks. Can you find all 16 internship membership criteria for APPIC membership on our website? Yes or no? Just want to make sure you know where to go. Yes, fantastic. Absolutely. And the first membership criteria that I want to focus on is criteria number 1, which is the idea that we're going to look at the internship level of training, knowing that that is probably relevant to most of the audience, although postdoctoral training is important too. So in terms of internship criteria, the internship is an organized program with a focus on training. So the primary focus needs to be on training. So should the primary focus of your internship program be on service delivery alone? Yes or no? Let's see some chat activity. No, you got it. Right. So that's an important part of what we do, but it's not everything that we do. And so I think that's really a key component of this criteria that I want to underscore for everybody today. And then, as I mentioned earlier, if we move on to the next slide, you can see some clarifications about membership criteria number 1, which is that we are more than service provision, we're an organized program. So what do those clarifications tell us? 1 is that we need to have a statement of the training program goals and a description of those direct service experiences, and a description of our training curriculum, and a description of how the program is integrated into the larger organization where it resides. So how does your training program fit into the mission of your larger institution? So I think this is really important, and you might think about this as, again, that overview, the broad overview of your program and how it's a program more than a supervised clinical experience. Okay, so moving on to the next slide. along those same lines, another really important thing that distinguishes a program from an experience is APPIC membership criteria number 7, which is that the internship provides a minimum of, let's see some chat activity, how many hours per week of structured activities? What's our minimum? How many hours per week? Yes, I'm seeing so much chat activity. I wish you all could see each other, 2 hours. So a minimum of 2 hours per week of structured didactic activities. Now, does APPIC say how you have to do those structured didactic activities? Do you see that? Like you must do it this way in the clarification? No. Seeing a little bit of chat. No, we don't. We're not prescriptive. So there are lots of ways that you could do this. And let's see some chat activity. What are some of the ways where we could do structured didactic activities as part of a broader internship experience? So people are noting in the chat grand rounds, case conferences, seminars, discussion groups, journal clubs. This is great. Webinars, yes, yeah, all virtual right now, absolutely. Journal article review. Yeah, and some people are also noting in the chat that they do more than 2 hours, so that 2 hours is a minimum, but their program may go above and beyond and do something more like 4, I saw 5 hours per week, which is great. So wonderful, these are great examples. Moving on to the next slide, again, I want to highlight some other important criteria as they impact your thinking about your overall training program and the curriculum within the program. So I think Jeff underscored this a little bit earlier, but another important criteria is membership criteria number 11, and that's that you have a written statement or brochure that's made available to prospective applicants or trainees. So another chat question for you all. Should your program brochure be available to potential applicants? Yes or no? This is important. Yes, yes, yes. And it could be online. It could be something that, you know, I don't think, do we say publicly available, Jeff? Yeah, we don't. So theoretically, you could have no website and you could make a brochure available to people who ask. Theoretically, you could do that. I think most people use the directory online and they have a website.
They do, as long as they have a brochure available, and I can name at least one site that still mails out that brochure.
Oh, yeah, see? So there's a diverse way of addressing this particular membership criteria. We don't all have to do it the same way, but the important part is we have an up-to-date written statement that describes what we do. And I think of this as a piece of informed consent, right? We want our potential applicants to understand what they would be getting were they to come to our training programs. Another way of doing that is to use a shared language. And so there's another resource that we have on the slide for you, which is the taxonomy. And the taxonomy is a guideline for training programs all across the pipeline. So from doctoral level through postdoctoral level. And it's very helpful guidance for us as trainers to think through how we describe the education and training program and content to potential trainees. And one of the things that you'll see, and one of the reasons that the taxonomy was developed, is because we were all using different language to describe the same kinds of things, which is kind of confusing for our consumers, right? The potential trainees who'll be training with us. And so the taxonomy was developed so that we would use a shared nomenclature to talk about what we provide as trainers. I don't think it's fully adopted by our field, but I think the more that we as trainers familiarize ourselves with the taxonomy and utilize it to describe, you know, as a tool to help us describe what we offer to potential trainees, the better, because they'll get more consistent information across programs. So I highly recommend the taxonomy. And in that vein, would you all think the taxonomy is worth consulting with when you're doing your annual program brochure update? Would it be worth maybe reading? Yes or no? Seeing some yeses. Yes. So put a pin in that link. I'm curious how many people, just out of curiosity, how many people in the chat, and there's no shame here, have heard of the taxonomy before? Yes, I've heard of it. No, I haven't. Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of yeses and some nos as well. Yeah, I think the Board of Educational Affairs has done a lot of outreach to educate the psychology training community about the taxonomy. And this is, I'm being US centric here because we're talking about APA and what they've done in the taxonomy coming out of US psychology training. But clearly, you know, we aren't all aware of it. And so I think it's just important resource to become familiarized with, especially as you're describing educational offerings. So we have more work to do with implementation of the taxonomy, but you may have noticed some changes in the directory online asking about the percentage of time the training program offers in certain training experiences. And those percentages, it used to be yes or no, right, Jeff? Was it yes or no before, and now it's percentages?
Yes, it used to be a checkbox.
Yep. So the percentages link to the taxonomy labels, and that's why APPIC made that shift. So just so people are aware, if you notice that change, it was to be more in line with the taxonomy.
So it lists up exposure. If it's just an exposure, that's a smaller percentage versus major emphasis. Major would tend to be 49, 51% or so. And so that allows programs to clearly identify what training opportunities, what availability they have. And applicants have really liked this because as opposed to checking a box on neuropsychology, you know whether it's a major emphasis there or if it's just an exposure of 10% or 15% or less. So applicants really like this. And so did the training directors. Almost everyone has completed that. So I'm sure you all have. But that's a great example of taxonomy.
Yeah. Thank you, Jeff. And I think the taxonomy, for those of you, maybe some in the chat activity, anyone who's a postdoctoral training director who's with us today, you could just say yes. Yeah, so we have some postdoc training directors, which is great. So for postdoctoral training directors in the US, so CPA doesn't accredit postdoctoral training programs, just a FYI. So again, in the US, I think the taxonomy is especially important if you're talking about specialty level training and how you want to describe your program, and even just reflecting on what your program offers. If you're trying to decide if you're offering specialty level training or not, the taxonomy might be a helpful tool to help you sort that out, in addition to the level 3 competencies that are put together by all of the specific specialties, and that would be with APA. So those are important things for postdoc training directors to consult too. So moving on to the next slide, we have clarifications related to this idea of the description, right? The brochure that we make available. And so here we're talking a little bit about what we should attend to when we update our brochure or write it for the first time if we have a newly developed program or we're developing a program. So one of the things, and I'll put this out there to the chat. I mean, I know there's lots of words on the slide, but you know, stepping back for a minute, when you think about the function of your brochure, which is providing informed consent to potential applicants about what your program does, what do you all in the chat think would be important to have in that? And I'll read through our membership clarification, but what do you all think would be important to put in your brochure to attend to? So I have rotation and evaluation expectations, salary, breakdown of activities and training, rotations, description of the mission, hours that are expected to work every week, grievance information, philosophy of the program, benefits, didactic information, absolutely outcomes. Yeah, so much good stuff. You all could be teaching this. Yes, absolutely, you got it. So what we have in our clarification for this particular membership criteria are all of those kinds of things. So starting broad, what's the program goals, and then the objectives that feed into those goals, and then going from there to what are the training methods, content and curriculum to achieve those goals, and then going from there to the resources provided in order to be successful in achieving those goals. And those resources include both like supervisors, so your resources within the program, as well as things like everyone mentioned, stipends and whatnot. And then the training sites. So someone had a question earlier about consortium or settings with multiple training sites. Describing those training sites is really important. So those are some of the clarifications that APPIC has provided regarding what we want our membership to be updating their written materials with. So that's great discussion. Okay, so moving on to the next slide. Okay, so what are some of the major components of a psychology training program curriculum? So for a training director, when you're taking that broad view, we've just been talking a little bit about how we have membership criteria. You can go to our website to review all 16. Many of them have clarifying statements to make it more clear what we're getting at. So hopefully that will be helpful to review. But then I think the bigger thing is, how do all those criteria and the clarifications of the criteria inform what you're doing in your training program curriculum? And so that's what we're talking about here in this section. And I think people got to this a little bit in my last question in the chat already, but the first thing you want to be thinking about is, what are the overall goals and objectives of the program? And I'm going to apologize in advance because I am teleworking, as I'm sure many of us are, and it is garbage day in my community, so there may be some background noise. So my apologies if that's disruptive for you all. I'm just going to try to push through it. It might just be disruptive for me. So anyway, back to one of the major program components is identifying your goals and objectives. So when we think about goals, like a goal would be one broad outcome, like license eligible health service psychologist. That's what our training program wants to produce, a license eligible health service psychologist. Any other thoughts about what an overall big overarching training goal might be in the chat? Nothing. Okay. Well then, I'll keep going. So we want to think broad with our goals. The objectives are going to get a little bit more focused. Yeah, ethical is good. Absolutely. So broad might be, okay, I want to produce license eligible health service psychologists, right? And then the objectives might become just slightly more narrow, which means they are an ethical provider. They are able to engage in, empirically based clinical work, right? So we're getting slightly more narrow. And then from there, we want to go into what are the competencies, right? So what are the competencies that we need to provide people with, that we need to make sure they attain in order to meet those goals and objectives? So it all goes together. And there's some great ideas in the chat about what some of those objectives might be, like consolidated professional identity development and competencies to practice in an integrated care setting. So some of this may be more site specific and some of it may be broad, and that's fine, right? Like ethics cuts across everywhere, we hope, right? And some things are more site specific, and that's great. Another component that you really want to be thinking about as you develop your curriculum or update your curriculum, depending, on your circumstances as a training director and where your training program is in its development, is thinking about how do you assess the skills of your incoming trainees upon their arrival or prior to their arrival. So if we know that they need to have certain competencies at a certain level of independence in order to meet our overall goal and objective for the program, then it's probably important to check in on, where is their competency coming in? So we know, okay, baseline, they're here, and we need to get them to here in order to achieve our objectives and goals for the program. So thinking through, how do you do that baseline or initial or incoming competency assessment? And there are lots of ways to do this, but putting some time and thought into it is a recommendation that we have for you all. And there are some nice papers coming out of TEP about this. So there was a competency assessment project that APPIC supported and some work that came out of there with recommendations of how do we assess competencies. So that's one thing that we would encourage folks to do. And I think your professional communities are a great place to look for resources. So whether you're part of a VA psychology training council like I am, or if you're part of ACTA like Matt is, there are smaller professional groups as well as the larger APPIC group, right, that we're all a part of, where we share things as training directors with one another. Some programs might talk about this as a baseline assessment or an initial assessment of skills. It's not usually focused on grading so much as taking stock of where someone is so that we can then design their individualized training plan for the internship year. Another important component of your curriculum is your orientation process. So how do you orient incoming interns and or postdocs to the institution, to the training program, to the goals, objectives, and competencies, to the learning opportunities, to initial assessment, all of those big pieces of your program. How do you set that up? Another important component, of course, is how you do those 2 hours. So we just mentioned earlier the APPIC membership criteria. You have to have at least 2 structured hours of educational activities every week. And how do you do those? So how are you doing didactic seminars, grand rounds, case conferencing, journal clubs, all those things you all were talking about earlier in the chat? How do you do those things? Another important component too is the way that you support and oversee the work of your supervisors. So supervision of supervision, development of supervision competencies, those kinds of things. And also socialization for the incoming training group. So how are they coming together and having a cohort experience? And also socialization within rotation. So how are you bringing the rotation or training teams at different sites together for regular meetings and so on. So there are many other components to internship and postdoctoral level training beyond those that we have highlighted on the slide here. I'm curious in the chat box if folks see other major training components in their training programs, or if you want to underscore things that are on the slide that seem important to you. So what are some of the major training components that you folks see? Anything? Yeah, right now there is a question in the chat about just with COVID-19, how telehealth might become a more, how telehealth might impact socialization, but also may become a major training component, and telesupervision. Assessment and individual therapy seem to be important components that people are pointing out in the chat. So there are a number of important components beyond just what we have here on the slides. And yep, group therapy skills, supervision of supervision is another component that folks are noting. Diagnostic work, research projects, teaching or educational presentation and projects or expectations for trainees. And then also committee work is something that's coming up in the chat. So the opportunities for the professional development that comes through committee work, whether it's within diversity committees, within the training program, training committees within the training program, or broader facility or institution committees. So that's another component. Outreach and consultation are some other major curriculum components that people are noting in the chat. Exactly. So you all have some wonderful ideas, and I think they're all important. So just because we don't have something on the slide doesn't mean it's not an important component. And I appreciate the chat discussion pointing out new and different ideas beyond what we have. Okay, so then moving on to our next slide. This slide is about kind of, again, underscoring an earlier discussion point, which is what is the difference between a supervised clinical experience versus an organized training program, and the internship falls into the latter. So from our stance at APPIC, an internship is a clinical experience, and it is more than that alone due to the focus on competency acquisition and professional development. So in your all's opinion in the chat, what do you see as making the internship training program experience different than a supervised clinical experience? Whether it's on the slide or you think of it in a different way or you say it in a different way, what do you think makes internship so different than other clinical experiences? So we have the multiple points of evaluation, the focus on competency development, the systematic and organization, that learning is a priority versus service delivery, that there's a developmental model for acquiring the skills. There's so much happening in the chat. I wish you all could see your comments. The focus on learning, the focus on transitioning to professional practice. You got it. You all got it. Yeah, this stuff is great. Absolutely. So it's different. It's different than the clinical experience alone. So then we'll move on to the next slide and shift from curriculum. Oh yes, thank you. Thank you, Jeff. Curriculum focus and APPIC membership criteria impact on curriculum to multicultural and diversity issues, and how these are important to attend to, how and why to attend to these during internship and postdoctoral training. I want to start by noting that there are updated APA multicultural guidelines that remind us that diversity and intersectionality are complex, and that these can and should be integrated into all aspects of how we practice psychology. And that includes, but absolutely is not limited to, how we do education, training, and supervision, which is especially relevant to us as trainers. So in the chat, I just want to ask again, no shame here. I just want to ask folks, have you read the new multicultural guidelines? Just yes or no. People reviewed those, and it's okay if people haven't. I'm seeing a lot of yeses and some no's, not yet. Some folks saying that they've read what the guidelines are, but not all of the other components of the document, because it is a hefty document. They came out, I believe, in, was it 2017? They are newer. They're an update from the older guidelines. So I think they're fairly new, comparatively speaking, to, for those of us who've been out of training for a little bit, they're newer than what we would have trained with. So I think it's important to review them. And we can look for the citation once I'm not talking. I can look for the citation and share that with you all to give you the specific year. So I think this is the first thing that I would say is taking a minute, which I know is hard because we're in the middle of a pandemic, and the training director role is a busy one. As Jeff aptly noted in an earlier slide, there's a lot that we do. And taking a minute to go back to these guidelines if you've already read them, or to review them for the first time if you haven't, I think is a really great way to start informing your thinking and sharing that, you know, with the other trainers in your training community, your training committee, your colleagues, to think through what can this tell us about how we do diversity work within our training programs. So I think that would be a wonderful place to start. Okay. And then and I've noted these are not the only areas. If you can go back just a minute, Jeff, I'll just make note of a few things on this slide. So like I said, I really think all aspects of what we do as trainers lend themselves to thinking through diversity, inclusion, equity, matters of social justice. And when it comes to some of the specific tasks of a training director, there are some key areas where we can especially be sure to attend to matters of diversity. And one has to do with the efforts that we make in an ongoing way as a training program. And also, how do we work on self-reflection and self-awareness, both for ourselves as trainers, for our institution more broadly, and also for our trainees. And then thinking about recruitment and selection for potential trainees, as well as for staff and retention of staff with diverse identities. And then also, how do we infuse all of this into our curriculum development, as we were just talking about some of those curriculum components, right? So now moving on to the next slide, we'll talk in a little bit more depth about some of those things. So what you see on the slide is 6 areas, and this is not an exhaustive list. So these are 6 areas that we think are, again, especially lend themselves to attention from a diversity framework, but there are more areas than this when we think about our training work. So for you all in the chat, in addition to the 6 areas that you see, or maybe also underscoring some of those areas, what aspects of internship level training lend themselves to intentional review and efforts related to matters of diversity and inclusion, in your opinions? We'll just see some chat activity here. Anything? So seminars, right? So that gets with curriculum. Yep, absolutely. Mentoring, absolutely. Yep. Advocacy, that's huge, and that's definitely missing on our list. Absolutely. So we have, you know, outreach, recruitment and retention, curriculum development, the populations that we serve, mentoring of our trainees, the work and training environment or the climate, and specific training program objectives. And absolutely infused into that is supervision. Some folks are noting in the chat, and advocacy would be a wonderful addition to that list. So moving on to the next slide, we're going to talk through a couple of these topics. And again, I would love your participation via chat. So the first topic is outreach and recruitment and retention. So why do you all think that recruiting and retaining diverse interns and postdocs is important? And we'll just see some chat activity. Why does this seem like an important thing to do? And then we'll talk a little bit about how we might do it. Yes, absolutely. It's a justice issue. Learning for all of us is increased when we have diverse learners and teachers, absolutely. It makes for a richer educational experience. It reflects the diversity of the people that we serve. You all got it, representation, and so many more reasons. So we all agree that this is something that's important. And then how do we do this work? So I think of it as making our programs inclusive and appealing to people with diverse and intersecting identities. That's what I think that the biggest how is. And then there's some specific strategies that we might utilize. So what are some of the specific strategies that you all might utilize to recruit and retain trainees into a program? Again, being mindful that your program is inclusive and appealing to those diverse individuals. And you see some of our ideas, but they're limited. There's so much more than you could do than what's on the slide. So I'm curious what other folks think too. So highlighting things in the brochure, decreasing obstacles. So this might be, not requiring travel, for example, in order to attend interviews due to like financial implications, setting COVID aside. That could be social justice issues. Making sure that you're accessible to people with disabilities is something that's coming up. Building in diverse staff and recruiting and retaining and supporting them are some of the things that I'm seeing in the chat, just to name a few. Absolutely. Yep, so there's so many things that we can be doing and going to places, so partnering with professional organizations that have similar values and being present or part of those organizations to do some of this recruitment, I think is a really wonderful strategy, and making sure that all of this is captured in your public material. So going back to the importance of updating that brochure every year. Yep. So again, I wish we had more time to dig into this, but we'll move on to the next slide, which gets at the curriculum. So again, why is addressing matters of diversity, inclusion, social justice, why address these things in our curriculum? I think you all hit on some of this before, but what are your thoughts about why this is important? Yeah, we gotta do the work. So someone's putting in the chat, you gotta walk, you gotta walk the talk. You can't just talk about it, you gotta live it. And so infusing it into all aspects of our curriculum is part of how we live it. Absolutely. So that's a big part of the why, and then it builds in the opportunities for the reflection on hot spots and blind spots and all of that we were talking about earlier. So this is great stuff that's coming up in the chat. So the why is clear, and then it's the how. So how do we do this? So some people, similar to the APA standards of accreditation, some programs take the approach that every single offering must have diversity infused into it, right? So we're addressing diversity and ethics in every single didactic, no matter what the topic is. So that's one strategy. Other strategies may be to have specific diversity journal clubs or seminar series, or have a diversity committee. So there are lots of different ways of doing this, and the idea is to be intentional and effortful and continuously refining whatever those strategies are over time. Are there strategies that you all have used to infuse these matters into your curriculum? And if so, put them in the chat and we can share them with the folks who are here. Okay, seeing none, I'll move on for the sake of time. So we will go to the next slide. So these have to do with how do we infuse attention to diversity and inclusion into the service and the research opportunities that we provide within our program, and also the mentoring opportunities that we provide within our program. So I think here we might think about, again, what's the overall mission of our institution? What kinds of diverse or underserved or underrepresented people do we serve? Can we create specific and intentional clinics or rotations or training positions or programs related to these things? And then that all goes in our public materials and is infused into our curriculum because we need to provide the didactic preparation for our trainees to engage in that service delivery, right? It's all linked together. And the same with the research opportunities too. Do you have staff asking important questions? Even right now with COVID, we see some groups are disproportionately impacted by this pandemic. And if you have faculty who are exploring that and writing papers about that and asking questions about that, making sure that potential applicants know that, because if they share those interests, they can work with those faculty and do, answer those important questions and provide important supports to people who are marginalized and underserved. So I think, again, it all folds together, right, and flows together. I think one thing that we do know, there's good amount of literature that illustrates that people who are in marginalized, underserved populations do better academically if they have mentoring. So providing mentoring to your trainees is really important, especially people who are from marginalized and disadvantaged backgrounds. But really, I think mentoring is a good idea for all trainees. So that's getting to point number 4 on the slide here, that providing those mentorship opportunities is really key. And it doesn't necessarily need to be based on identity matching. I mean, that could be valuable to some trainees, but some folks may want to work with someone who is different from them, or they may want to work with someone who shares a salient identity. So one way that sites might handle that is to ask mentors to share salient identity information and or diversity interests that they have, and to make that available to potential mentees, and the mentees can request a mentor that's a good fit for them from their perspective, whatever that means. So that's one way to do it. Sometimes we don't have enough robust resources in terms of our faculty to do one-to-one mentoring. And so another strategy might be a mentoring group where you have a group of folks who are mentored by, 1 or 2 mentors. And then moving on to the next slide. Okay. One thing is that we, I think, want to be really clear is stating what our diversity-related objectives are. So, being very clear that we value diversity and we want to have these kinds of educational outcomes related to diversity. And so thinking about that, I'm curious if folks have anything they want to share in the chat in terms of what type of training objectives your sites have related to diversity. Okay, I think people are still thinking on this. So for the sake of time, I will go ahead and move on. But the idea is that we just want to be really clear about what kinds of objectives related to diversity training do we want our trainees to achieve, and how do we measure those, and how do we create opportunities for those to be achieved, and what's the vehicle for that learning. And there are some examples on the slide, which you all can read and you'll have. And then I think the next slide, this one is, wait, where were we? Actually, going back one, Jeff. The last one is the training environment. So I was just talking about training objectives, but point number 6, the training environment. The one thing I want to say about this is that this is where the program lives your diversity philosophy and commitment. So this is about the climate that you create. Again, we want to develop programs that are attractive for recruiting and retaining people with diverse identities and intersecting identities. And so this is how we really showcase that. And from our mission all the way through what we do every day, like you all were talking about in terms of how is it integrated into our curriculum, our supervision, our patient served, it's not just talking about it, it's doing it. And the climate is the feel that the program has in the doing it. And the bullet points on the slide are some of the ways that we get there. Okay. And if we had more time, I would ask you all how you showcase your commitment to social justice within your programs, but we do not. So we will now move on to the next slide, which is about mentoring your interns about the postdoctoral application and selection process. So this is super important. APPIC provides many, many resources, and there was a TEP special section, I should say, in 2018 around kind of the current state of the postdoctoral training landscape. I think this is really important. For those of you who are internship training directors only, sometimes it's easy to not be as focused on the postdoctoral level of training. And our interns really do need the mentoring and support and guidance, because it's a very different process than what they've done to apply for internship. Although we are getting more cohesive and organized as a community, we really still are evolving as a field in how we think of the role of postdoctoral training. And there's great variability across training sites in how much interns within those sites feel educated and supported and guided by their training directors about applying for postdocs. And so I think this is an important part of the role of an internship training director, which I know you all saw earlier. You have many roles and you know from living them, but this is one to add to the plate as well. And so the takeaway from this is, here's my question in the chat: are there resources on the APPIC website related to postdoctoral training? Yes or no? Can you find them there? Yes or no? Yes, there's tons. So there are educational presentations, there are timeline documents for the average timeline for applying for different types of postdoctoral positions, research versus clinically focused versus clinical neuropsychology. There are webinars, recordings of webinars. The postdoctoral committee does new webinars every year. There is now a document, a PowerPoint slide deck for doctoral students to educate them about the role of postdoctoral training. So there's so much there, and I encourage you to go there and learn more and share what you learn with your interns so they're prepared. One important support that you can give them is protected time on the day of the uniform notification day so that they can field their offers instead of trying to manage that in between seeing patients or clients. And then moving on to my last slide. There is a slide I thought, oh, maybe not. Supervision, is that Matt? No, that's me. Okay, that's my last slide.
You can go ahead and do that one.
Okay. Okay, so this is where I say, sometimes being a training director feels like you're herding cats. And for me, this feeling is most present when managing the behavior of supervisors, given that I'm not their boss. So I'm usually a lateral leader of those folks. And it's a very critical component of the training director role. So just encourage people to attend to it. So make sure that if you're setting up a new training program, that you're integrating supervision of supervision into your program from the start. Also building in developmental opportunities for your supervisors to refine their supervision competencies, because you may have folks with no training in supervision competency, and you may have folks with lots of it, depending on, you know, the era that your supervising psychologists were trained. I recommend that you go to the BEA Supervision Competency Guidelines. So again, yes or no in the chat. Have folks seen those guidelines? I see one, yes, no, yeah, okay. So definitely, so we're a mixed bag. So please check out the BEA Supervision Competency Guidelines. I think these are super important. And make sure that you're integrating opportunities for your supervisors to develop those competencies within the program. And one thing that I'll say, this is probably the hardest part. I don't know, maybe it's not hard for you all, but for me, the hardest part of being a training director is, and yet the most important part, so it's a both and for sure, is intervening regarding competency problems, whether it's intervening regarding competency problems in our trainees or in our colleagues who are supervisors. But when those things come to our awareness, we must attend to them, and that I would say is one of the hardest pieces of that. And the BEA Supervision Competency Guidelines are a good resource for thinking through what makes for competent supervision and supporting your staff in getting there. And building in supervisors meetings, you know, supervisor development time, all of that can support that. So I didn't mean to steal your slide, Matt. I thought it was assigned to me. So I will turn it over to you, and you can clarify and correct anything that I said regarding that topic.
It was assigned to you.
Okay.
Hi,
Good.
everyone. I'm Matt. Allison, that was amazing to behold, what you just covered in that amount of time. That was a work of art. So it looks like we're about an hour and 12 minutes in. So if you're like me, you're feeling a little, you know, sluggish right now. So I don't have prepared chat questions, but I'm going to make some up as I go along. And the first one, so we can get some oxytocin going here. And as you answer this in the chat, if you could answer to everyone so we can all get a little oxytocin going, is just share what in your opinion is the cutest animal. My dog. There's a lot of my dog. We got hedgehog, babies, capybara, love it, love it. All right, good, hopefully. Squirrel outside my window, that's awesome. Well, I hope that got the blood flowing a little bit because we're actually moving into some material that's a little heavier. And usually when we talk to interns about this or training directors about it, it comes with some anxiety. So on a more serious note, my first question to the chat group would be, it's a true false. Is the only purpose of evaluation to see how your interns are doing? Yeah, I'll take false or no. Correct. There are many purposes for evaluation. Certainly one of them has the gatekeeper function of seeing how your interns are doing and making sure they certify. But of course, also supporting their growth and then supporting your growth as a training director, supporting your supervisor's growth, supporting the growth of your training program over time. I often think of it as just paying it forward. And you know, bringing gratitude, I think, to the evaluation process that our interns do for us in spending their time and their energy in improving our supervision, our programs, I think can be a really useful perspective. So targets for evaluation, of course, the interns or the postdocs, supervisors, the training program. I would add here the didactics, the seminars, workshops, whatever other didactics you're doing. And then the program evaluation as a whole. So this lets you see how you're doing. Of course, it's a requirement if you're APA accredited and part of what's expected of APPIC membership, but it's also just good practice. And it really allows you to dig into what's working better, what's working less well. Also lets you see how you're doing as an administrator, as a supervisor, as a sounding board, as an advocate, all those roles that Jeff mentioned at the beginning of this presentation. Okay, so in orientation, reviewing the evaluation process and the forms, including the requirements for program completion and due process and grievance procedures, all of that is actually part of due process. And I think it's useful to assume when your interns land that they are cognitively compromised because of their anxiety and the transition. So what I invite my interns to do is to ask questions that they're pretty sure were already answered. And I share with them what I just shared with you, that I assume you're not going to hear things as well as you normally do. I'm happy to repeat. I'm happy to repeat. Because it won't all get in, particularly if it's really dense material. Yes, good point, Amber. Further compromise because of COVID, yes. So to remind them that part of due process is going through that all and then making sure that they have in writing and verbally where to go to get those resources easily, because they're going to forget what you said. And you'll be repeatedly answering those questions over the course of the year for your supervisors as well. And as noted here, the types and source and delivery method may vary. A lot of people are doing electronic evaluations. Many are still doing paper. Do what works for you and your institution. Talk to people in your own association or council about what they're doing for models. The evaluation schedule very much varies on the rotation structure. We have a whole year non-rotational internship at the University Counseling Center. So we're doing baseline, which is this pre-evaluation feedback that you heard Allison and Jeff refer to. And we do it as early as we possibly can when we feel like we have a sense of the beginning competencies of our interns. For us, we begin in late July or early August, and we do our baseline usually in early October, because that's when our supervisors feel as though they have a beginning sense of where our interns are. And at that same time, many programs are doing self-assessment. So interns do self-assessment at that time as well. And then you can compare self-assessment and baseline. It's grist for the mill in the conversations in the supervision dyads. Yes, the question here is what formats people use. Some people are using SurveyMonkey or Qualtrics. A lot of people are using Excel. Many are still using Word or written. It differs. So many programs also, and this is a good idea, is have the written eval periods and then scheduled verbal periods as well. One of the things that I think is really important with evaluation, here I'll ask a yes or no question. When an intern and a supervisor sit down to have an evaluation conversation, whether it's verbal or written, should there be surprises? Yay! I think we're all agreed that we do not want surprises. And if there are surprises, it should raise some questions. That could be about the program, it could be about the supervisor, it could be about the intern, but it should definitely raise some questions as to why was that information a surprise? Because evaluation that supports growth is best done in a continuous way. Next slide, Jeff. Yes, so evaluations need to include specific competencies. Some people are using the embedded APA competencies. If you're APA accredited, that's the expectation. You can certainly have more than those competencies. And then behaviorally anchored, and that's being done in lots of different ways. Some people are doing it by level, sort of like incoming intern, mid-year intern, ending intern. Some people are doing the larger sort of scale, and some people are breaking it down like this skill should be intermediate for an incoming intern. This skill should be advanced for an incoming intern. You can decide how much you want to dig into the weeds in terms of the behavioral anchors, and look for models. Again, look for models within your own association. And then you should have and be very clear about minimum thresholds for successful completion of rotations in the training year. I think many programs have minimum thresholds for when a performance problem will be identified, or for where an intern should be at mid-year, as well as for certification of the internship as a whole. Yes, evaluation is not a surprise. We're on the same page, Jeff. It should definitely reflect development of skills. This is a very good point. It will cause you and your trainees many problems if you modify in the middle of a year. It'll make it very difficult for you to gather your aggregated data when time comes for self-study. And it's also just very confusing because then you're comparing apples to oranges. Definitely link program goals and objectives. It was told to me way back when by Joyce Ilfelder-Kay, who was chair of the Commission on Accreditation, and we all know well, that as much as possible, it's really useful to have a 100% line between what you publicly advertise to your prospective interns, what you tell them in orientation in terms of how you're evaluating, what the evaluations are actually evaluating, your program evaluation at the end of the year, and then your distal data, your post-intern surveys that you'll gather for interns who are 1 year out, 3 years out, 7 years out, however you're doing that. It simplifies things greatly. And whenever you make a change in your evaluation, you may have to make it in all 4 of those areas. Yes, I think we've covered all of that. Program evaluation. These 4 things are very important. How effective is your supervision? How effective are your didactics? Programs often also ask about the training atmosphere or the professional atmosphere, the degree to which diversity, inclusiveness are supported at the site. That's useful information in a program evaluation, in addition to the competencies and goals that you're saying you're training on. Satisfaction with the program, that can be done simply. If you want to get more complex with that, you certainly can. Evaluation of you as the training director, that is gold. And I think the more experience you get as a training director, the more you kind of hang on to the constructive criticism. I certainly crave it these days. And then distal versus proximal data. There's always a fair amount of anxiety about this for newer training directors. To make it really as simple as I can, proximal data is data that you're gathering while the intern is there. It is nearby, it is proximal. Distal data is data that you are gathering as the intern is exiting and afterward. Just to make that clear. And if your program's APA accredited, you'll need to aggregate both of those. Yes, you contact former trainees and get their input. That's a good, thank you for reminding me that of Jeff. So one thing that's really important in your exit interview is to get contact information that'll be lasting over time for your exiting interns. I usually get Gmails and cell phone numbers because those are lasting. There was a question of how often you should gather that data. Somewhat up to you. What you want to know is, in the years following internship completion, to what degree were the things that you were training useful to that professional as they look back? And that does seem to change over time. So you will see different data 1 year out compared to 7 years out. In our case, it's been interesting because it seems like for our interns, the further out they've gone, the more they've looked back and realized how helpful certain things were to them. So I don't think there's a specific requirement of how frequently. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff or Allison, but you know, I might suggest every other year, something like that. Okay, self-assessment and quality improvement. You got to do self-assessment. Yeah, just don't make it up and be honest. Always good. Don't falsify your data.
We had a question from a person that said that they've had 20 years of non-evaluation, and I thought that was a specific challenge, and just suggested that you don't want to make anything up. You got to be honest, but you can take a look at the program and find out where it's improved and why you made those changes to improvement, and try to provide that kind of data or information. And they take qualitative data as well as they do quantitative data. So I understand that, but you'll have to seek out that information from former supervisors or current supervisors who've been there for a while, and trainees as well. You can seek that information from them.
Thank you, Jeff.
Do your best.
Yeah, do your best. And also your former interns. Really what APA is wanting to see is that you're making effort to gather that information and then utilizing that information for program enhancement. That's really the key. And to that point, that's the purpose of self-study as well, to make sure that you're doing what you say you do. That is the role of the APA site visitors. They are the eyes and ears, so they are to observe to see that you're doing what you said you did. not generally to evaluate your program. And you'll hear that from COA folks over and over again. Moving on. Here's some of the language for program self-assessment. So of course it involves the interns. Really it's a 360, so your interns, your supervisors, yes, to make sure that you're doing what you say you intend to do, that you're being effective. It's a lot of words. I'll give everyone a moment. And they'll, you know, of course, they'll want to hear from the higher ups to make sure there's institutional support. Due process. So as defined, the due process is employed when a program has a concern or a problem with an intern. I would say that due process, like I said before, really begins with fully orienting your interns to the evaluation, due process, and grievance procedures. One of the benefits of doing that is that the intern can feel secure that you're not raising that issue because you have a concern. You're doing it because it's what you do in orientation. And this is the kind of thing that you don't need very often, hopefully. But when you do need it, boy, do you need it. You want it written, you want it specific, you want it benchmarked, I think, to other kinds of similar agencies that have training programs within your, like for us, university counseling centers. And then grievance is a procedure employed when an intern has a complaint or problem with an internship program. Yeah, good point, Jeff. APA won't punish you for the sins of prior training directors. Quick question, should you have a grievance log somewhere, even if you've never had a grievance, yes or no? Yes. Yes, many have had the experience of a site visitor ask them if they can see their grievance log, and the training director shows them a blank grievance log because it's for formal grievances, not informal grievances. Sample of problematic behaviors, and this language is becoming a norm in many training communities. So it can be really useful to use other sites' documents with permission to develop your own. But here are some problematic behaviors. And people are using slightly different language about this. It can be useful in some circumstances to run it by your director or legal counsel to make sure that your language doesn't have ADA implications that you don't want it to have. So some examples: the intern doesn't acknowledge, understand, or address a problem when it's identified. It's not merely a reflection of a minor skill deficit. The quality of services delivered by the intern is sufficiently negatively affected. And this language is in our due process document, but it's also in many, at least in university counseling centers, due process documents as well. Trainees' behavior doesn't change as a function of feedback, remediation, or time. And it has the potential for ethical or legal ramifications if not addressed. Can you advance us, Jeff? No? We're having an advance problem. Another one is that we have in ours is if it's taking an undue amount of time on behalf of the training staff. 3 elements of all due process is notice, hearing, and appeal. And this can break down in all sorts of ways with your specific language. But these 3 components really have to be there. The notice, so interns have to be formally notified. At that point, the home institution needs to be formally notified as well, if they haven't been informally notified prior to that. A hearing, so a meeting of the internship faculty However, that is structured. And again, there's lots of models. We form a committee of which the training director is the chair. If the problem is somehow with the training director, then the director would be the chair. And the intern can appoint 1 or 2 members that they choose to that committee. Really, you want to set up a situation where the intern always has a recourse, that they're always being fully informed and that they always have a recourse. And speaking of recourse, yes, accommodations are certainly supported, but that is different than a performance problem. And you really want to keep those very, very separate. And then appeal is the recourse that an intern would have at every step of the process. So again, it should be an iterative process. There should be ongoing communication between the intern and the training director. Your policy should be updated and reviewed regularly. We have the good fortune of having a psychologist on our staff who's also an attorney who helped us draft ours. You definitely want to balance clarity and specificity with allowing some flexibility. As the person who helped us draft ours told me, there's loopholes in it, but it's 18 pages, and to close all those loopholes, we'd have a 50-page document. You want to incorporate a range of potential program actions. Definitely want to involve the home institution. You definitely want to be aware of how HR may or may not be incorporated. Another thought is how the chain of command might be incorporated. Let's say an intern's having an issue with the director who's a supervisor. Who would they go to under that circumstance? Would an intern have access to the ombuds person at your institution? And thank you, Jeff. And ensure that your policies are being reviewed. Do we have samples on the APPIC website?
I don't recall any samples. It's just a matter, if your intern filed a grievance, you log that, and the grievance is in the trainee's file, the process that it went through, the file or the grievance that they submitted, as well as any associated kinds of remediation plans that are associated with that, is in that trainee's file. So you have a log of how many grievances that have been filed, and then you have documentation in that trainee's folder. Usually it's in the trainee's folder. It can be in the supervisor's folder, but those are separate. And it is only for formal written grievances.
Yes. And really what you're hoping is that this is very rare, and that you can engage in an informal process instead of it reaching a point of a formal process. Which brings us to, are you able to advance it, Jeff? Oh, well, here's some samples. Misrepresentation in public documents, insufficient supervision, bias or unfair evaluation processes, boundary violations, benefits issues, certainly harassment of any kind. Here's some others: dual multiple role relationships. Oh yeah, don't avoid the APA ethical code. Avoid dual multiple role in relationships. Power differentials, certainly. I think we all tend to be very sensitive to power differentials, but I think it's important to just be vigilant about that. Thinking about unintended consequences. And like I said before, very wise to get legal vetting of all of these policies and consult. You can consult with APPIC, you can consult with people within your association, your peers, your director, all of the above. Next chat question. What's everyone having for dinner? Greek, nice. Oh, lovely. Lobsters? Wow.
They're from Maine.
Yeah. Nice. Sorry, I just made somebody hungry. Megan's gonna have cake. Good call. All right. So interns should be able to grieve any perceived injustice, not just evaluation. So that list you just saw, that covers almost everything that we tend to hear. Yes, and it should afford review at least one level. Ours has several levels that are possible. That includes the ombudsperson of our university. So in terms of APPIC, we have an IPC service that we, board of directors, and Jeff do on a daily and weekly basis. If you want to consult with, go ahead, Jeff.
Sorry, I just said hourly. I mumbled that under my breath.
Oh, hourly. We do hundreds. Do we do hundreds a year, Jeff, at this point?
We do.
Yeah. So we do them for DCTs, for training directors, for interns, for former interns. So be aware that you are not alone.
And it's a great concept because previously APPIC only had formal grievances. So those were pretty rare that someone wanted to go to that effort to file a formal grievance. But the consultation has been very popular, and we still only have 6 or 8 formal grievances a year. But as Matt said, last year we had 225 IPCs. So that's a lot of consultation that saves a lot of issues or problems, etc. I mean, not all IPCs end in everyone being satisfied, and that's when it can go to a formal grievance if they're not totally satisfied or are satisfied with how the consultation mediation went. But that's how it's kind of structured to be give trainees and trainers an opportunity to get a little bit of a third-party outside observation. Kind of, am I totally off here, or am I following the policies the way I interpret my policies? That's usually one of the more common questions. And we're happy to take a look and provide that input. Sometimes it's long and complicated. Sometimes it's brief and policies. You follow your policies and you'll be in good shape. And then you'll revise your policies to say, ooh, I think they need to be slightly improved. And that's just part of program improvement, which is a great demonstration to APA of quality improvement. We've revised our grievance procedure, our due process, so that it doesn't drag it out for 4 weeks. We didn't mean for that. We never thought we'd have a 4-week thing, but it did draw it out. So we decided to make it a 5-day requirement to provide feedback.
Yeah, it is best.
Somebody asked about IPCs. So they're all over the place. They can be very complex. They can be that the person feels like they're being singled out and discriminated against. Sometimes that gets mixed up with competency issues there because they've been called on to turn their notes in or complete their notes in a timely manner, and to more serious things where someone has been discriminatory in how they have pointed out their deficiencies, kind of thing. And they need consultation to get a third party to look at that, as well as consultations on pregnancy leave, or COVID-19 responsibilities, or what essential employee definition means. So they're all over the place. Sorry, Maya.
No, that was very helpful. Thank you. All right, next slide.
Sorry, it's coming. That's it. Policies. I think that's it.
That's us. Get in touch if you need to. And I think we wanted to open it up for additional questions at this point. So feel free to fire away.
So there's a few on there. There's a few on there if we want to scroll through those, but we can see if others have questions.
I can say there was one question about grievance and due process in consortiums, which tend to be more complex programs to oversee. And so one of the comments that I put in the chat is specific outreach and consultation with training directors and other consortium programs might be one way to go. So I know we have former board member Jenny Cornish who oversaw a consortium, so that might be a person to reach out to. I'm not sure, Jeff or Matt, if you have other ideas for that, where someone might reach out to.
Joyce Hilfelder Kay is very knowledgeable on consortiums and is a great resource. They are complex, and you can certainly reach out to me, and I can put you in touch with a couple of people who are managing these larger consortiums. The names are escaping me right now, but I can certainly look those up and get those for you. But there are a number of consortiums out there that are very successful and manage those well. They are more difficult to manage, as anyone knows. Even if you have 8 interns and 16 rotations, that's a lot to manage.
And then we have another question in the chat, which is, what are the biggest barriers to membership for new programs? So I'm assuming that's APPIC membership. So I'm curious what Jeff or Matt, what you two think about those.
So I was just starting to write back on that one. And the biggest barriers is for a new training director is to figure out how the institution works, because they're in now an administrative role, usually different than their previous role, not always, but usually. So they have to figure out who do they need to talk to about support and clarifying their commitments to these trainees, and carving out time for supervisors and how those folks are rewarded for the time and effort that they put into the training program, who funds this program, and how they need to be kept in tune or on the same page about how this program is working. The funding resources are very important these days, and if you're ignoring the people that are funding your program, they're going to be coming to you and say, why do we have this program? We have a funding shortage. So other barriers are that if you're younger, sometimes trainees look at you as a colleague as opposed to a experienced, advanced training director kind of thing there. So you want to, it's the professional component there that it's like when you move from graduate student to intern, you move towards being a professional, and it's quite different. And I think it's the same thing moving from a internship or from a supervisor role to a training director role. All of a sudden you're in more of an evaluative position, and people kind of look at you a little bit differently. And yeah, you can be professional about that, but you can also stay engaged with everyone.
Thanks, Jeff. There's another question about whether or not APPIC's going to be offering a standalone workshop like this one on helping unaccredited programs move towards accreditation. And I don't know that we have a plan for a standalone workshop, but I'll share that we do have a program called the Accreditation Readiness Project, where we have supported unaccredited programs in moving towards accreditation through consultation, which we pay for. So APPIC pays for that, and then supports a learning community of multiple programs, learning about accreditation, and then setting shared deadlines to take the steps on the path toward accreditation. So Jeff, I don't know if you want to share more about that or what the plans are for maybe the next round of the Accreditation Readiness Project.
Yes, we're pouring some substantial resources into that program. They serve as mentors, as advisors, as people who keep you on track. It's a great program that's been in operation for about 3 to 5 years. And programs that sign up for it have to be kind of committed to doing it, because it does take some time to do it. But it's sort of what some of us need to keep pushing us forward. And so that next round should be coming out soon, I believe. I can't recall exactly the right dates.
And we don't really want to speak for APA, but for decades they've gone to all the various conferences and given workshops. So it'd be surprising if there wasn't some information coming out from APA on how they want to handle that during COVID times.
when we have in-person conferences again, and I don't know, I think it was just announced that APA will be virtual this year and not in person, but oftentimes to Matt's point, there are site visitor trainings at conferences, and so there may be a site visitor training at the virtual APA conference. I don't know. Again, we can't speak on behalf of the Commission or APA, but there might be. And there sometimes are self-study preparation workshops as well, and so there might be a self-study preparation workshop, and those are usually standalone. And even if you're not interested in becoming a site visitor, I highly recommend as a training director going to those trainings, because it helps you understand at a deeper level the standards of accreditation, and then it helps you think through how your program is or maybe is not meeting all of them and what you need to do. So it's a really nice first step, even if you aren't ready to do site visits yourself. And you can always say no when asked to do site visits, so I wouldn't let that steer you away. So we can't say if those are happening on behalf of APA or the Commission, but those would be other great ways to prepare for accreditation. And then there is a question about a sense of APA's site visits and when they'll be back on schedule given the pandemic. And we, again, don't know and can't speak for APA, but I do know that they're updating their website and they're in communication with sites that are impacted with things being pushed back. So I would just encourage folks to reach out to APA COA directly with any questions about an impact on your program. Certainly the paperwork preparation side of things you could still continue to be doing if you're an unaccredited program, but when you might be site visited given the pandemic is a little bit more up in the air than it usually is.
I was just on a Zoom prep call with Cindy Juntanen, who's the chair of COA right now, and she reminded everyone that the APA Commission on Accreditation is themselves accredited by the Department of Education and I think CHIA, and who have both encouraged flexibility. So the name of the game right now is flexibility, and I think that's generally understood.
Someone asked a question about supervisors, having two different supervisors, and they're asking if it's a certain way that that's implemented. There's really not a one-size-fits-all. There are several models. One is to have two supervisors throughout the year. One is to have a major supervisor throughout the year and a minor supervisor for 6 months, and then another minor supervisor for 6 months. So you can see the configuration there that you can do that in different ways. And a lot of people meet that by having rotations where the trainee goes to a new rotation. But if you're at 12 months in the same spot, you can use a model that uses a major supervisor for, even a major supervisor could be 6 months and 6 months, and changing those out as well.
So there's a couple more ARP questions. So there was an ARP question, the Accreditation Readiness Project. Is the Accreditation Readiness Project inclusive for APA or CPA accreditation? So right now we don't have a CPA version of the Accreditation Readiness Project. It's something that we are exploring, but the standards are different. And so we would need to put out a call and have a competitive bid for a consultant who would be well equipped to help prepare Canadian programs in the way that we have a consultant who's well equipped to prepare the US program. So no for now on that. And then similar question was, is the Accreditation Readiness Project something that's available to postdoctoral programs? And right now, because there really is the minority of programs that are accredited at the postdoctoral level, we've taken a step back from that and actually are providing resources and support to prepare postdoctoral training programs for APPIC membership first, because the bulk of psychology postdoctoral training programs aren't APPIC members either. And then of those that are APPIC members, a smaller number of them are accredited. And so it just seemed like, given where the field is developmentally right now, membership readiness project was what was warranted, and that's what's been put into place. Although I think we may consider an accreditation readiness project for the postdoctoral level, just like we would for Canada perhaps, but that would be a longer process and is not something that's available right now. I don't know if you want to add more to that, Jeff or Matt.
I think that's good. There's another
think we have-
question on, is internship APA accreditation tied to participation in the APPIC match? So APPIC does not require internships to be accredited at this time. I mentioned earlier on about provisional membership, as we may be moving towards requiring accreditation for internships. And APA does not require a program to be a member of APPIC to be accredited. Those were two separate organizations.
So at present time, doctoral programs need to be accredited for their students to enter the match. And there's been a discussion for several years as to whether or not that would be true for internship programs. And that conversation is continuing.
Correct. And we had a question about didactics end a few months prior to the end of the internship. Does group supervision with a reading list count toward the 2 hours of learning activities? Those reading lists would count towards learning activities, so you can certainly count those. It's similar to that question earlier about journal clubs. You could structure it as a journal club if you wanted to, where they could discuss it and that count towards that, and it keeps people motivated and engaged in what they're reading. So that's one suggestion there, but those are learning activities.
That's a good idea. Professional development for licensing prep.
There was a question about how to support development of supervisor competencies, and also a question about how to balance in a smaller program the multiple roles that a training director might have as a primary supervisor and also the administrative role. So those are two separate questions, but I wondered if we might want to talk about supervision development and then also training director managing multiple hats.
Well, multiple hats is it's something that can be a little crazy making when you're new to the role. And I often talk to my early training director colleagues. It's sort of like when you're learning to drive and 25 miles an hour feels really fast, you know, where you can't really put anything out of your consciousness at first, but you internalize a lot and that allows you to take on more. Of course, organization really helps. And support from your administrator really helps. Talking to your peers, again, within association really helps. And having timelines and tasks lists really helps. However that works for you, whether you use Outlook or Word or whatever. It ain't easy.
We had another question on, if we are APPIC member site, there is a requirement to become APA accredited within a certain number of years. Can we remain an APPIC member? You will need to move towards accreditation. So you'll have 3 match cycles if this passes, if this moves forward. And so you'll have 3 opportunities, at least 3 years to become accredited.
And did we want to get to the supervision training piece of things?
Yes, I think so. And I can start, and I would appreciate input from you too as well. I think for developing supervision competencies in your supervisors, you know, just thinking through, first of all, what are the resources, similar to what Matt said earlier, what are the resources that might be available, whether it's from, you know, us at APPIC or your professional organizations that you might be a part of, other training councils, and then how do you build it into your program? So is there a monthly, you know, supervisors meeting? Do you have maybe an annual training day where supervision competency development is part of that? Do you reach out to experts in the field about supervision? You never know. People say yes, and they'll do things, you know, with no cost. You might be able to have a virtual, you know, annual check-in with someone like Carol Fallender, you know, and then each year you can check in on how your supervision competencies have evolved in your supervisor with an external expert, because sometimes you know, experts are the people that come in from outside of our programs with a PowerPoint versus the training director within the program. So sometimes it can be helpful to partner with someone who has expertise in the field who's not you, and your staff may respond differently. So those are some strategies that you might consider. Even directed readings of the supervision competency books together. So taking one chapter a month and checking in on that. There's lots of creative ways that you can build it in. And I think if you can, the extent that you can support your supervisors and find some time for them because they're busy just like we are, I think they'll feel that, and that will, you know, garner a lot of engagement if you can. So even if you end up having that protected time for the annual meeting, and maybe that's the time that you work on things because they're competing to engage in that might work better in your system than, say, the journal club style read a chapter a month approach where it's one more thing that they don't have time to get to. So just thinking about what works best for your people in your institution, and then utilizing those resources that are external to your institution would be some of the recommendations I have. And then I'll see what Jeff and Matt have.
Well, I know I only have another couple minutes, but let's see if Matt has any comments on that. But I wanted to thank everyone for being here today and participating, and appreciate that. We're going to try to make this recording available on the training resources page of the APPIC.org website, and really appreciate everyone's attention and engagement here. If you're interested in additional programs, etc., we're certainly going to have that option on the survey that we send out in a few minutes, or hopefully within a few minutes. Sometime this weekend it will go out. And appreciate all those nice compliments and thank yous.
Yeah. Thank you all for taking some time to be with us today. I know it's not the same as being in person at the membership conference, but we are so grateful to be able to provide some kind of support to all of you as you do this work, especially right now during COVID. So thanks again, and please do share your feedback on the feedback form. And if you have ideas of other things that would be helpful, you know, I think we're trying to think about how can we be creative to help our membership right now. So please do share your ideas.
Thanks again. Bye now.
Thank you, everyone.